Cecil might be right, and some of you aren't willing to concede to that notion or even have that conversation. But when it comes to the world of Invincible and even the larger superhero world as a whole, it is a necessary conversation because in order to save people, sacrifices need to be made and contingencies need to be put into place. Invincible Season 3 has finally wrapped up airing, changes fresh in the air from the new status quo, new costumes, and a whole new attitude across the board. At the forefront of all these changes stands Mark Grayson and Cecil Steadman, the pillars of the Invincible world who want the same thing but stand on completely different sides in order to achieve it. But before we get into that, let's talk about the channel's continuous sponsor, Boomslight, which is home to some of the most stylish anime-inspired original designs you've ever seen. They make t-shirts, hoodies, phone cases, knickknacks, you name it. So use my link and code for 10% off your next purchase. And now let's get back to the topic at hand. But who's right in this battle of ideologies? Usually, Invincible has a lot of grays within its storytelling, but sometimes there's clear black and whites. And in this instant, to me at least, Mark is the one clearly in the wrong, and that fact is something most people don't want to acknowledge. This whole season puts Mark's moral code and decisions on display and criticizes them. He is the main character, we mostly see the world through his eyes like most main characters, but sometimes that POV diverts, and anytime that happens in most series, the person that stands in opposition of the main character faces the most amount of scrutiny. I've seen it happen with Gabby from Attack on Titan, Abby from The Last of Us, and now Cecil. These arguments come from a place of emotion rather than reasoning or logic. It's because we as people have an inherent bias to things or people we like, and when it comes to media, especially adult media, we need to put that aside and look at what the story is trying to tell us. Mark is a superhero, and his goal is to protect people, but Mark's hyperfixation, or rather stubbornness to play it by the book, can and has almost been a detriment to the lives he's been trying to protect. His inexperience and his choices hold a lot of weight, being the strongest superhero on Earth after all, and with all that weight comes responsibility. A responsibility Mark hasn't fully grasped yet. That's where Cecil comes into play. Cecil is old, he has experience in and out of the field, he brings in results, and most importantly, he's willing to make tough choices to save as many lives as possible, while trying to be as ethical as you possibly can given these circumstances. Opinions might be split on that last one. He's akin to Amanda Waller, just not as problematic. Again, opinions might, you know. And the series constantly shows us that Cecil is doing the best he can for everyone involved. Tough decisions need to be made, and the Viltrumite army isn't going to sit around and wait for Earth to get ready for their impending invasion. Cecil isn't in the business to force Mark or any hero to get their hands dirty like he does. He understands that he cannot solely rest the fate of the world on these heroes, let alone Mark. It's a responsibility they all share. Another aspect that works in Cecil's favor is the idea of second chances and Mark's hypocrisy when it comes to that. Willing to give Nolan a pass, but no one else, especially since some of them haven't done anything on the same scale as Nolan, or don't get the breathing room that Nolan does, or rather the free will.
You're a hypocrite, waltzing off to help your mass-murdering dad, but God forbid anyone else screws up and then tries to make good.
The entire arc between these two clearly paints Cecil as someone who deeply understands Mark's side of the conflict, because just like Mark, he felt the same way once upon a time.
They should be in prison or dead.
But at the end of the day, you can be the good guys,
or we can be the guys that save the world.
It doesn't help that Mark constantly questions his actions while Cecil is steadfast in his own. But then again, that is the point of this season. For Mark to learn and be able to see different perspectives other than his own, to stop being stubborn and look at the bigger picture.
I won't hesitate to kill them.
Another aspect of this conflict between the two that I like, and maybe I'm grasping at straws here, but Cecil, a lot of the time, feels like a father figure to Mark. Ever since the Omni-Man incident, he tries to keep Mark sane by shielding him from the perception of the people on the outside looking in that were affected by his battle with Omni-Man. He continuously, no matter what, is willing to be an outlet for Mark to vent his frustrations.
Look, kid, we've had our differences, but we're still on the same side. We're still trying to save lives, and we're still the good guys. So if you need someone to talk to,
You're the last person I want to talk to right now.
And as the two work together more, Cecil, while not completely honest, tries to give Mark the benefit of the doubt. I know it could be argued he does this to keep Mark in somewhat good graces because he's a valuable asset, but I don't think that's all to it. Cecil goes out of his way more so than with anyone else, and as the series progresses, he continues to not only understand that Mark is the best chance they've got, but also looks out for his best interests. He's also one of the few people to never ask Mark to outright kill anyone and tries his best to reason with him when he does or doesn't do so, like when Mark is beating himself up for not killing Angstrom Levy.
You probably should have. Would have saved a lot of lives, but you can't blame yourself for being a good person, Mark.
Cecil is shady and manipulative. He knows all the right things to say, but he's a man who has a heart and cares about the people around him despite not always showing it, at least explicitly. He wants the best for everyone involved, some more than others, like with the Graysons and Donald. He was already burned by Omni-Man once, and I'm sure it's a failure he'll always hold himself partly responsible for, because it was a risk that he ultimately decided to take. After all, despite his caution, he did end up seeing Omni-Man as a genuine friend. If we were to go by what is communicated in Season 1, it feels like a genuine betrayal. Cecil isn't one to make the same mistakes twice, and we can argue whether or not how he handled the situation at hand was right, because there is some stuff that was pretty messed up, but I ultimately think he made the best decision he had at the time, and the best decision overall. The entire arc kind of vindicates Cecil's precautions, as not only has Mark gotten more violent during the first half of the season, before tempering down during the later half, almost becoming like Omni-Man, while Omni-Man becomes more like Mark, just something I've noticed. But also the entire Invincible War plotline that really puts into perspective what one Mark is capable of if he were to switch sides. Another thing I've noticed is that Mark treats Oliver the same way Cecil treats him, especially during the attack on the prison. This is what makes this relationship so fascinating and complex, and why ultimately I don't think Cecil is entirely wrong, as he said himself.
You see things one way and you won't make room for any other viewpoint.
Invincible Season 3 asks a lot of questions, a lot of moral questions. It puts hard decisions in front of its character, and it asks its characters if they're willing and ready to step up to that plate, with Mark and Cecil being the ones taking the charge of that conversation. And yet, Cecil never turns his back on Mark, regardless of whether or not their opinions differ. This is Grimtoki, this has been Beyond Animation, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.